Hello, American Literature 2 class down in Plymouth. This is Professor Steve Nooner, and that's King Mindaugus the bear. He's there to block the light that would be coming in from behind. So say hello to the bear if you need to. I just want to talk to you about Robert Frost and help you get started. I know a lot of you are trying to think about what you want to say about this, and there's a lot swirling in your heads. And I want to give you some angles and ways to think about Robert Frost that might be useful. The first poem, and we're all moving to the second book, the second volume of your book, but you can find almost all of these poems online because he wrote around 1915. So Frost is very much available to you just through the internet. Another thing you can look at too is the way poetry was written up to this time. For instance, the writers prior to Frost, Stephen Crane, we read him in our last class. A man said to the universe, "Sir, I exist," and the universe replied, "That fact does not in me create a sense of obligation." Those naturalist poets who said it was a cold, dark world out there. Well, Stephen Crane was one sort of poet at the time. Another was E.A. Robinson, the very comical and tragic and ironic poet of local characters and local color. Robinson's poetry is sort of a holdover from realism. He has lovely poems that they usually have some sort of irony or ironic ending. You should think this was the time when people were writing stories like The Gift of the Magi by O. Henry, where, the Christmas story where the girl cuts her hair to buy her husband a watch chain and he sells the watch to buy her some combs for her hair, right? And they both give their gifts, but they don't have them, but they don't have the reason why they got them. But they had love, right? So those sort of ironic stories were very common. And so when you read a poem like Richard Cory, that's a poem where E.A. Robinson deals with a rich man named Richard Cory who goes downtown and everybody thinks he's absolutely wonderful, but then he shoots himself one calm summer night. So those ironic poems were very much the style, and also narrative poems. Frost comes along and he really breaks into modern poetry, and he does it by following images mostly. I mean, he still has his voice and he still says I every once in a while. He has a lot of use of his own personal subjective I pronoun. But I think that Frost is also breaking us into a look at just objective images that speak to us through nature. In this way, he recalls Wordsworth, the older romantic poet who wrote about nature, but also he is doing something very modern. In fact, Robert Frost became the toast of all those modern artists and poets of Europe. He was all those guys who splashed the buckets of paint on the walls, those sort of folks. They loved Robert Frost's poems. So when you think of him as a nature poet, realize that the people reading him at the time found something very much more interesting about Frost in his intensity, and in the darkness, and in the clever designs, and the contrasts, and the tension, and the use of imagery. In fact, a school of poetry would follow after Frost called Imagism, in which they would try to remove the I and just follow images like Japanese haiku poetry. But Frost isn't quite there. He's a little bit before that, and he actually has a wonderful style. So the first poem I want to talk to you is called Nothing Gold Can Stay. And this introduces a sort of tragic sense of loss. Even though it's kind of light and funny poem, it suggests that you can't hold on to beauty forever. Nothing lasts forever, and everything is temporary. Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour. Then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief. So dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. Well, there's a poem that tells you Frost has a temperament that looks at loss and actually puts it in its perspective. Another poem I want you to think about, they're just to start, very short poems, I can read them all quickly here to you online, is a poem called Fire and Ice. This is a kind of doomsday poem about how the world will come to an end, but it might actually be about our emotions and the way we look at the world. Fire and Ice. Some say the world will end in fire, some say in ice. From what I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. So for Frost, he's really thinking about whether it's passionate people of fire, that end the world, or whether it's coldness, apathy, indifference, and hate that really ends the world. So I want you to think about those two poems as you go through the rest of Frost's poems and you look at the classic ones like The Road Not Taken. We all know that poem. I'm not going to feature that in today's video. But let me talk briefly about some of the poems that I do want you to focus on. Stopping by Woods in a Snowy Evening. I won't read all of this to you because it's a little bit longer, but it's about a person riding through the woods with his horse, probably in a carriage, and he stops for a moment to look at the snow falling. And if you've ever heard snow, the silence of snow at night swirling down, it's incredibly quiet. You know, snow acts as a sound absorber, and you can actually hear the pelting snow on your own collar fall. It's incredibly soft sound. And Frost is taken by the beauty of this. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though he will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. But then, as he stays there, something dark is awakened in Frost. He says that this is the darkest evening of the year, and I don't think that's just a statement of the relative value of light at that night. I think he's talking about some kind of darkness within. But he concludes the poem by saying the woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So the idea there is that he's not ready to die. This is an affirmation of life. And though there might be darkness within and even depression, Frost knows that people depend on him and that he can't give up. And though it might be sometimes very comfortable for us to all curl up in a ball and make the world go away and want to die to all the pain and tension in the world, sometimes it's better to reaffirm one's approach to life. But I have miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Another poem that is very similar to that is called Acquainted with the Night. I'll read this one because it's not as familiar as Stopping by Woods. I have been one acquainted with the night. I have walked out in rain and back in rain. I have outwalked the furthest city light. I have looked down the saddest city lane. I have passed by the watchman on his beat and dropped my eyes, unwilling to explain. I have stood still and stopped the sound of feet when far away an interrupted cry came over houses from another street, but not to call me back or say goodbye. And further still, at an unearthly height, one luminary clock against the sky proclaimed the time was neither wrong nor right. I have been one acquainted with the night. That's a wonderful poem about somebody taking a long walk at night. If you've ever done that, and you know that feeling, that sort of feeling of alienation and darkness that is actually kind of comforting in a way as you walk out there at night sometimes. Well, the luminary clock against the sky is probably the moon, and it's saying that this is neither a good time nor a bad time. This is neither wrong nor right. This is a time of in-between things and shadows, light and shadows mixed together. And he says, I've been acquainted with the night, which for us would be like to be acquainted with the dark side, to have gone to the dark side of town, or to have explored dark feelings in oneself. So I want you to think about that poem. Frost loved to take long walks, and I think that might be part of the reason he wrote it. Another poem that I want you to look at is called Desert Places. And this one, I won't read all of it, but it starts with some images that sound like stopping by woods on a snowy evening. Snow falling and night falling fast, oh fast. In a field I looked into going past, and the ground almost covered smooth in snow, but a few weeds and stubble showing last. So he looks at this blanket of snow that's falling everywhere across the whole world, reminding us of the end of one of James Joyce's stories called The Dead, in which snow falls over all of Ireland, and it just makes us all equivalent to the dead. So this vast blanket of snow is falling everywhere, and he feels that there's a blanker whiteness of benighted snow with no expression, nothing to express in this snow, meaning that you're looking at nihilism, you're looking at emptiness, you're looking at non-existence. This is very dark stuff. And so he ends with this thought: they cannot scare me with their empty spaces between stars on stars where no human race is. I have it in me so much nearer home to scare myself with my own desert places. So it's a kind of interesting and defiant last line. If they think that outer space and all that darkness in outer space is scary. Frost says, I have much scarier places right inside of me. So I want you to look at that poem too. And also a funny little poem called Design. This one is again driven by an image, and it's a sonnet. If you look at it, it's 14 lines, and the first 8 lines are an image of a spider eating its breakfast, essentially eating a moth, and it's on top of a plant that should be blue or purple, this thing called a heal-all, but the plant has got a blight, it's got a disease. So it's a white spider holding up a white moth on a white flower that should be blue. And the heal-all plant is something that's supposed to heal us, but itself is sick. So as this poem begins, and I want you to think about all of these images, it's almost like a modern art design. White on white on white. You know, those designs where they put cream on alb, on bone, you know, all the different shades of white to show you the differences and just slight differences in whiteness. White is the color of death, by the way. It's the morbid color. It's the color that even the darkest person becomes a little ashier and whiter when they die. And so whiteness creeps in as a kind of disease. And so as white is the color of death, he's contemplating that. And he thinks about the great design, God's design of the universe at the end of this poem. I found a dimpled spider fat and white on a white heal-all, holding up a moth like a white piece of rigid satin cloth. Assorted characters of death and blight mixed ready to begin the morning rite. Like the ingredients of a witch's broth, a snowdrop spider, a flower like a froth, and dead wings carried like a paper kite. What had that flower to do with being white, the wayside blue, and innocent heal-all? What brought the kindred spider to that height, then steered the white moth thither in the night? What but design of darkness to appall, if design govern in a thing so small? So that's an interesting poem because he's saying what feeds the spiders? Why does God steer the moths into the spiders' webs? Why do the spiders want to eat the moths? Why does everything happen the way it does? Why do we live by killing other things, eating meat or eating vegetables? We have to take the life from something else and put it in us. This makes all of existence kind of vampiric, and the little spider is like a little vampire sucking the life out of the moth. I like that he makes it sound like a witch's broth in this poem. You know, a snowdrop spider, a flower like a froth, and dead wings carried like a paper kite. It should sound like Eye of Newt and bat wing dropped into a potion for a witch. And he also has a wonderful line here, which is kind of a pun, that all of these ingredients are mixed ready to begin the morning rite, which I guess in Frost time, that would be like Quaker Oats, you know, morning breakfast cereal, mixed ready to begin the morning rite. But the words morning rite can be read 6 different ways. It's a pun. A morning rite, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, is a grieving ritual, like a funeral. To mourn rite is the right way to mourn or grieve. And a morning rite is something you write with a pen about grief. And then in the morning, we have rituals like washing and breakfast, and this is this spider's breakfast. And in the morning, we also write. Sometimes Frost might write his poems in the morning. But then finally, this is the right way to begin the day. So that's the sextuple pun in the poem. And what it says is that all of those meanings are the meaning here. When you hear it out loud in the poem, you don't know which one it is. Mixed ready to begin the morning rite. See, you don't know. And I think that means that all of the pun meanings that Frost is putting in this have to be considered. Another classic poem that you want to look at is called Mending Wall. This is Robert Frost's famous poem that Jack Kennedy used. I hear a lot of Frost with John F. Kennedy's voice in my head. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Good fences make good neighbors. This is the line from this poem. I hear a lot of this in terms of the Kennedy era because Robert Frost was made the poet laureate by John F. Kennedy, and he was the national poet for a short while in the early 1960s, and then he passed away. This poem is too long to read, but it says that the images are about walls, the walls we build for each other, and walls to block other people out, walls of social distance. and also when it's necessary to break down those distancing walls. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen ground swell under it and spills the upper boulders in the sun and makes gaps even two can pass abreast. And the work of hunters is another thing. I've come after them and made repair where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps I mean, no one has seen them made, or heard them made. But at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. So the first part of the poem, he's saying precisely what he's talking about is kind of these walls that are naturally built up, not walls that are aggressively broken down by people in your face and really trying to yell at you like the hunters breaking through the walls with the dogs, but breaking down walls naturally, breaking down walls gently, connecting you across traditions that might be separating us. And so he meets with his neighbor and he says, we keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each, and some are loaves, and some so nearly balls. We have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are till our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game. One on a side, it comes to little more. There where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine and I am apple orchard. My apples will never get across to eat the cones under his pines. I tell him, he only says, good fences make good neighbors, right? So that's the famous line. And Frost is wondering, why don't we pull these walls down? Why do we still need some of these old traditions? And you see the neighbor is very content with his traditions. He doesn't want to break them. So there's kind of a difference between kind of conservative view and a more liberal view. And finally, Frost muses and he says, spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion in his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was likely to give offense. Offense. A fence, or offense, offense. Am I going to offend him, or am I going to put a wall between us? It's another one of these Frost puns that he loves so much. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, as it seems to me, not of woods only and the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and he likes having thought of it so well. He says again, good fences make good neighbors. Well, that last business is really interesting for us because it's this idea that, Frost wants him to help break down the wall too. He doesn't want to do it all himself. Then he'd be like the hunters who push down walls unnecessarily. He wants this wall to come down by mutual agreement on both sides, but he doesn't think very highly of his neighbor. He calls him an old stone savage armed. So maybe the neighbor has a point. Maybe they do need this wall. Maybe they aren't perfect on each side. Maybe Frost's heart is not as open as it could be. Maybe his heart isn't as open as it could be. And so the phrase itself becomes a kind of wall. This is about traditions and what traditions we still need to hold on to and what traditions we need to let go of. And so I think you want to think about this poem as very emblematic of how Frost uses nature to make very deep points about life. One other great poem that most people haven't heard of is called Birches. And this poem is, again, a little too long for me to read. I just read that whole last one, though. So I'm going to try to make this short. It's about a fantasy about birch trees when they're bent over by snow and they look like the tops of the trees are now touching the ground. You can see them all curved because they're very thin and skinny trees. And Frost says, what bows those trees down? And he imagines a boy in the poem who can somehow bend the trees down to stay, but it's not a boy, it's obviously nature, and he knows that. He knows that, but he's having fun fantasizing that a boy could swing them down, and then the tree could swing the boy up, and then he could come back down again, like a game. And this is what Frost thinks of heaven. He thinks it'd be nice to go to heaven and see what it's like, but you don't want to get stuck there, because he says the earth's the right place for love. He does not know where it's likely to go better. And the earth's the right place for love. I do not know where it is likely to go better, says Frost. So I think this means that, it's best to have your heaven down here on earth. And heaven, everything's perfect. So it's hard to learn, hard to grow, how to go anywhere because you're already there. You're already learned. You're already grown. But in this world, you can really learn. You need love. We suffer so much. This is the place you need love. In heaven, everybody's perfect and complete. They don't need love as much, or the assurance of love as we do here in the suffering world. This is a splendid poem. Please read through it. It's called Birches. And also, there's a poem called After Apple Picking, which I would really like you to take a look at as well. It's another one of my favorites. And it's a longer poem again, and it's about, again, this progress, going up the ladder, trying to reach towards heaven on the apple tree, you know? And then also this idea of death, as all the apples at the end of the season are crushed and made into cider. Listen to this one. My long two-pointed ladder's sticking through a tree toward heaven still. And there's a barrel that I didn't fill beside it, and there may be 2 or 3 apples I didn't pick upon some bough. But I am done with apple picking now. Essence of winter sleep is on the night, the scent of apples. I am drowsing off. I cannot rub the strangeness from my sight. I got from looking through a pane of glass I skimmed this morning from the drinking trough and held against the world of hoary grass. It melted and I let it fall and break. But I was well upon my way to sleep before it fell, and I could tell what form my dreaming was about to take. Magnified apples appear and disappear, stem end and blossom end, and every fleck of russet showing clear. My instep arch not only keeps the ache, it keeps the pressure of a ladder round. I feel the ladder sway as the boughs bend, and I keep hearing from the cellar bin the rumbling sound of load on load of apples coming in. For I have had too much of apple picking. I am overtired of the great harvest I myself desired. There were 10,000 fruit to touch, cherish in hand, lift down, and not let fall. For all that struck the earth, no matter if not bruised or spiked with stubble, went surely to the cider apple heap, as of no worth. One can see what will trouble this sleep of mine, whatever sleep it is. Were he not gone, the woodchuck could say whether it's like his long sleep, as I describe its coming on, or just some human sleep. So with winter coming on, Frost is entering a great tradition of poetry that includes great poems like John Keats's To Autumn, where you feel the season of death and cold coming. And Frost is thinking about this act of apple picking. He can still feel the lively activity of apple picking. As he tries to sleep, he can feel the pressure of the ladder on the inner arch of his foot. He's clearly done this, and he knows what he's writing about. But then there's an image that comes to him from the water barrel as he picked up a piece of ice, and it looked like a pane of glass, and he could look through it for a moment, because sometimes when you get a thin piece of ice, it's clear as glass, and he held it. And as it was falling apart, it magnified the world around him. This look of cold, this frozen ice magnified the world. And this is a cold vision, magnifying the world in terms of death. That do even great people go to the cider heap? Do we all sort of roll down the chute, and are we all crushed as though of no worth? I mean, no matter what we did, do we all wind up equalized by death? And so I think it's a wonderful poem because he's wondering what it is, and he's wondering whether it's like some hibernation, like the woodchuck, or whether it's some other kind of sleep. This also sounds a bit like Hamlet, doesn't it? So that's some Robert Frost for you. And before we conclude, I just want to share one last very funny Robert Frost poem, because Frost also, he wasn't this dark and this serious all the time. He also loved humor, and he had a sense of humor that shines through in a lot of his poetry. So if you don't hear the humor, you're gonna miss what's great about Robert Frost. So this poem goes: Provide, provide. The witch that came, the withered hag, to wash the steps with pail and rag, was once the beauty Abishag, the picture pride of Hollywood. Too many fall from great and good for you to doubt the likelihood. Die early and avoid the fate, or if predestined to die late, make up your mind to die in state. Make the whole stock exchange your own, if need be, occupy a throne where nobody can call you crone. Some have relied on what they knew, others on simply being true. What worked for them might work for you. No memory of having starred atones for later disregard or keeps the end from being hard. Better to go down dignified with bought-in friendship by your side than none at all. Provide. Well, Frost makes a wonderful joke about why you need to save money. Because if you don't have any friends at the end, at least you can pay somebody to be there with you when you go. It's a dark joke, but it's marvelous. He enters a whole tradition of poems of Where Did All the Beautiful Ladies Go, going back to Francois Villon's wonderful 1400 Ousant poetry called Where Are the Snows of Yesteryear, Où sont les neiges d'antan, where did they all go? Where did all the beautiful ladies go? And that's what Francois Villon asked 600 years ago. And Frost is saying, what happens to all these beautiful Hollywood stars of the 90s or the 80s or the 70s? Where are they now? Where are the Farrah Fawcett's, and where are the Faye Dunaways, and where are the Meryl Streeps? Well, Meryl Streep's still here, so there you go. So some of them stick around. But it's fun. What happens when you get old, and will people value you? And sometimes that might be the reason why you might save money, because if nobody's going to value you, at least you'll have something of value for yourself to keep you warmer when you do fade away. Frost is an old Yankee, and he sounds like it here, and so I think you should have some fun with him as you go forward. Sorry this is so long, but I just condensed about 3 hours worth of lecture into about 15 minutes. So good luck. I hope you watch this, and I hope it gets you started thinking about the poems. As you read through them, go back and listen to the clips of Robert Frost, and enjoy. Thank you. Bye-bye.